The clock on the wall read 1:15 in the morning when Emma McKinley's wheelchair tipped forward, and the world became nothing but pain. She hit the floor of her Rochester townhouse with a force that sent lightning through every nerve in her body, her twisted spine folding against the hardwood like a broken branch. The Christmas tree in the corner still glowed with soft white lights, its branches heavy with ornaments she'd placed there with her one working hand, and she could see them now through tears that wouldn't stop coming. Her voice echoed through the empty rooms as she called for help that wouldn't arrive. The sound swallowed by walls decorated with hope for tomorrow's celebration. In 18 years, she had learned what it meant to suffer, but nothing had prepared her for this moment alone on the floor in the dark hours before Christmas. Wondering if this was how her story would end, the townhouse had been specially built for her. Every doorway widened, every surface lowered, a monument to what her life had become since Easter weekend. 1993. She had been reaching for something in the storage loft at work when gravity betrayed her, when her foot caught between boxes and her body swung down, suspended upside down, until a coworker found her crumpled and unconscious. The doctors at Mayo Clinic had done everything they could. But reflex sympathetic dystrophy is a thief that takes first her ability to walk, then the straightness of her spine, then the opening of her left hand. By 1995, the disease had conquered her entire body, bending her forward at a 90-degree angle, shrinking her left foot to a twisted claw, locking her fingers into a permanent fist. Now she lay on the floor where she would remain for the next 8 hours, and every second felt like drowning in fire. The pain was beyond anything language could capture. The McGill Pain Index ranked it higher than cancer, higher than amputation, higher than childbirth. Her skin burned at the rumble of a truck passing on the street outside, at the hum of the refrigerator, at the whisper of her own breath against the floor. She had volunteered at the Salvation Army every Thanksgiving and Christmas since 1984, greeting people from her wheelchair with a smile that defied her broken body, telling them to never give up, to keep faith no matter how dark the world became. But now, alone in the pre-dawn darkness with her spine screaming and her lungs gasping and her heart wondering if it might just stop, she felt the weight of 18 years pressing down like stones. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. AMA had grown up in Iowa in a Christian home where faith was as natural as breathing, where prayers were spoken over every meal and God's presence felt as real as sunlight through kitchen windows. She moved to Minnesota as a young woman and found her calling working with disabled people through the Rochester Park and Recreation Department's adaptive program, pouring love into lives that the world had forgotten. It was the kind of work that made her soul sing, the kind of purpose that felt like partnership with something divine and eternal. She married, raised two sons, Jason, and another boy who would grow into men she was proud. Avan built a life filled with ordinary miracles, birthday cakes, soccer games, bedtime stories, Sunday services at Autumn Ridge Church. When Easter came in 1993, she went to work like any other day, never imagining that in a storage room lined with boxes, her entire future would shatter in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The fall left her unconscious for 2 days, and when she woke in the hospital room, she had no memory of the trauma. But her body remembered, oh, how it remembered. The pain began as a whisper and grew into a scream that never stopped. Nerves misfiring like broken wires, sending false signals of agony through pathways that should have carried sensation and movement. Reflex sympathetic dystrophy syndrome, the doctors said. A rare and progressive nerve disorder that turns the body against itself. They tried everything: medications that made her sick, therapies that brought no relief, surgeries that changed nothing, experimental treatments that offered hope and delivered despair. Kathy Rugberg became her caregiver in 1994, a woman with gentle hands and a patient heart who would stay beside her for 18 years, who would witness every struggle and every small victory. The wheelchair became her world, a prison on wheels that defined the boundaries of her existence. Her spine curved further with each passing year until she hung perpetually forward, her face toward the ground, Her neck twisted at an angle that made the simplest tasks feel impossible. Her left hand curled tighter and tighter until it became a club. The fingers locked in a fist so tight that the skin underneath rotted away from lack of air and light. Her left foot shriveled and twisted until it barely resembled something human. A gnarled root that bore her weight but could not carry her forward. High-pitched sounds made her skin feel like it was burning. Bright lights sent daggers through her skull. The vibration of a passing semi-truck on the highway could trigger waves of agony that lasted for hours. She was confined to the wheelchair 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unable to walk, unable to stand, unable to do anything but exist in the narrow space between suffering and survival. The doctors at Mayo Clinic, one of the finest medical institutions in the world, threw everything they had at her condition. Over the 18 years, she saw more than 200 physicians, including 63 specialists who studied her case, consulted with colleagues, searched medical journals for answers. Dr. David Bell became her primary physician, a man who would care for her for nearly a decade, who would write careful notes about her condition and shake his head at the impossibility of improvement. They told her the spine would never straighten, that she would never leave the wheelchair, that the best she could hope for was managing the pain enough to make life bearable. Blood clots formed in her legs, threatening her life, and doctors recommended amputation, but she refused, clinging to some stubborn hope that God had not finished writing her story. The years stretched out like a desert road with no end in sight. Each day a test of endurance, each night a battle with pain that stole sleep and peace. There were moments when death seemed like mercy, when the agony became so overwhelming that the thought of heaven where there would be no more tears, no more pain, no more twisted bodies and shattered hopes, felt like the only comfort left. Insurance evaluations reduced her to a case number. Pain management clinics offered pills that dulled her mind but couldn't touch the fire in her nerves. Side effect illnesses piled on top of the original condition like cruel additions to an impossible burden. She nearly died several times from the blood clots, from complications, from the sheer weight of suffering that pushed her body to its limits. Through it all, she clung to prayer like a drowning person clings to driftwood, whispering scriptures into the darkness, reminding God of His promises, even when she couldn't feel His presence. But something remarkable happened in those years of suffering, something that the doctors couldn't measure or explain. Despite the pain that never ceased, despite the body that betrayed her with every breath, Emma's spirit grew stronger, brighter, more resilient than steel. She volunteered at the Rochester Salvation Army every Thanksgiving and Christmas, positioning her wheelchair by the door to greet people coming in for holiday meals. Her face twisted toward the floor, but her smile, genuine as sunrise. She would tell them, "Look how bad I have it, and I'm still able to be positive and give thanks to Jesus." People who met her, the door attendants at Mayo Clinic, the clerks at Walmart, the volunteers at the Salvation Army, ever forgot her, because even in her broken state, she radiated something that defied explanation. A joy that shouldn't have been possible given her circumstances. Major James Fry, leader of the Rochester Salvation Army, would later remember how she sat there year after year, bent over in her wheelchair, telling people not to give up, reminding them that faith was stronger than pain. Kathy Rugberg, who helped her with every basic need for 18 years, bathing, eating, everything saw. A woman who never complained, who never cursed God, who somehow transformed her suffering into service. Emma kept working on projects from her wheelchair, kept praying for others even when her own prayers for healing seemed to bounce off the ceiling, kept believing that God was good even when her life looked like evidence to the contrary. She recognized small miracles along the way, that she had survived the original fall because God was with her during those 2 hours hanging upside down, that He had sent Kathy as a caregiver, that He had provided the specially designed house, that He had given her the strength to encourage others even in her brokenness. Her faith became like a muscle strengthened through constant use, tested by fire and hammered on an anvil of suffering until it was nearly unbreakable. She studied scripture with an intensity born of desperation, memorizing verses about God's faithfulness, about His promise to never leave or forsake. about the way he walks with his children through valleys dark as death. She learned that rejoicing in trials wasn't about denying pain, but about choosing hope despite it. That patience developed through suffering creates character, and character produces a deeper faith and a stronger hope for what God might do in the future. Her sons grew up, and Mary Jason's wedding in 1993 was the last time he saw her walk, and she became a grandmother. Loving those children from her wheelchair, unable to hold them at eye level, or run after them, or do any of the things grandmothers dream of doing. Christmas was always her favorite time of year. A season when the story of God becoming flesh and dwelling among humanity felt especially real, especially precious. In December 2011, she prepared for the holiday with the same care she'd given every year, decorating her townhouse with lights and ornaments, baking what she could from her chair, anticipating the arrival of her sons and their families on Christmas Day. She worked at her computer on Christmas Eve, late into the night, preparing for tomorrow's celebration, her heart full, despite the pain that never ceased. The wheelchair tipped at 1:15 in the morning, and she fell, and the impact was catastrophic to her fragile, sensitized body. She screamed for help, but no one could hear her in the townhouse with its specially designed walls. And the hours crawled past like years. She lay on the floor as the clock ticked toward 2, then 3, then 4 in the morning, her body folded at impossible angles, every nerve firing distress signals that felt like being burned alive from the inside out. The Christmas tree lights continued their gentle glow, oblivious to her suffering, and she thought about how she might die here, alone, on the floor of her home, on the morning of Christ's birth. The pain was beyond anything she'd experienced in 18 years of unimaginable suffering. A crescendo of agony that made her wonder if her heart might simply stop from the overwhelming assault. She cried out to Jesus, not with theological precision, but with the raw desperation of a child calling for her father in the dark. And the hours continued to pass. 5 o'clock, 6, 7, 8 until she had been on that floor for the entire night, writhing and screaming and praying and wondering if this was how her story would end. And then, in the darkness of that December morning, something changed. The air in the room shifted, became charged with a presence that felt more real than the floor beneath her, more solid than the walls around her. She felt warmth beginning to spread through her body. Not the burning fire of nerve pain, but something gentle and healing, like sunlight after winter. She sensed, rather than saw, a figure entering the room, and when she looked up through tears and pain, she saw a robe of white, more brilliant than anything her eyes could fully take in, a brightness that made the Christmas tree lights look dim as dying stars. She knew instantly who it was, not through rational deduction, but through a recognition that went deeper than thought, a knowing that came from her soul rather than her mind. Jesus knelt beside her on the floor where she lay broken and twisted, and she felt his hand touch her spine. The sensation was impossible to describe in ordinary language, not a physical touch, so much as a presence that moved through her body like water, like electricity, like wind that rearranges everything it touches. She felt her spine beginning to straighten, vertebrae shifting and aligning after 18 years locked in that 90-degree curve, bones moving that shouldn't have been able to move, tissue reforming that had atrophied beyond repair. There was sounder cracking and popping like branches breaking in a storm, but no pain, only the strange sensation of being rebuilt from the inside out. She watched through vision blurred by tears and wonder as Jesus took her left hand, the hand that had been clenched in a fist for 18 years, and began to open the fingers one by one. The flesh underneath was rotten, gray, and dead from nearly 2 decades without light or air. And she watched as new skin began to form, pink and healthy, regenerating before her eyes like watching creation happen in her fingers flexed, responding to signals from her brain for the first time in years, moving with a freedom she had forgotten existed. Then he touched her left foot, the twisted, shriveled thing that barely resembled a human appendage, and she felt it growing, expanding, straightening, returning to its original shape and size. The sensation was overwhelming, not painful, but so intense that she thought she might faint from the sheer impossibility of it all. Time seemed to stop or stretch or somehow exist outside its normal boundaries, and she was aware only of the presence of Jesus and the miracle happening in her body. When the physical healing was complete, Jesus stood and offered his hand to her, and she raised her newly reconstructed hand to meet his. Their fingers touched, and waves of warmth and strength flooded through her, a power she had never known, her heart completely overtaken by love that felt infinite and personal and absolutely real. He helped her to her feet that hadn't borne her weight in 18 years. And she stood upright for the first time since Jason's wedding in 1993. Her legs shook, uncertain of their purpose, muscles that had atrophied, trying to remember how to function, and Jesus steadied her, his hands holding hers as she took the first tentative steps. The bones continued to crack and pop as they settled into their new positions, her body adjusting to straightness after so long bent forward. But he held her hands and she kept walking, one step and then another, her mind barely able to comprehend what was happening. She cried and shook, overwhelmed by the impossibility and the reality of it all, her heart racing with joy and fear and wonder all mixed together in a torrent of emotion too large for her body to contain. Jesus remained with her for a time that felt both eternal and instantaneous, his presence more real than anything she'd ever experienced. And then gradually, gently, he released her hands. She stood alone in her living room at approximately 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve morning, upright and whole, her spine straight, her hand open, her foot restored, able to walk for the first time in 18 years. The Christmas tree lights continued their gentle glow, witnessing a miracle that would baffle doctors and transform lives and become a testimony shared around the world. She walked through her house, testing her legs, flexing her hand, touching her straight spine with wonder, and she wept with gratitude that overflowed like a river breaking through a dam. A few hours later, on Christmas morning, Jason and his brother arrived with their families, expecting to find their mother in her wheelchair as she had been for their entire adult lives. They approached the door with gifts and greetings, ready for the same Christmas they'd celebrated for the past 18 years. And the door opened to reveal Ima standing upright, walking toward them with arms outstretched. Jason would later remember the moment with perfect clarity. I could see down the hallway a little bit. And here she comes walking, and it's like, no way, he hadn't seen his mother out of a wheelchair since his wedding day in 1993. And now, here she was, straight-spined, whole, walking, and everything he thought he knew about the world shifted in an instant. The family stood frozen in shock and joy, unable to process what they were seeing, and Ima walked to each of them and embraced them at eye level for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The children stared with wide eyes, unable to understand what had changed but sensing something miraculous had occurred. They cried together, laughed together, held each other in the doorway of the townhouse while Christmas morning light poured through the windows. Kathy Rugberg, who had been Ima's caregiver since 1994, who had helped her with every basic need for 18 years, could only shake her head in disbelief and praise, overwhelmed by what God had done. The family spent that Christmas day in a state of shock and celebration, gathering around the woman who had been broken and was now made whole, sharing a holiday that would be forever marked as the day everything changed. The news spread through Rochester like wildfire, carried by people who had known Ima at the Salvation Army, at Mayo Clinic, at church, in stores around town. When Thanksgiving came the following year, Ima walked through the doors of the Rochester Salvation Army for the first time in nearly 2 decades. No wheelchair, no hunched spine, just a woman standing straight and tall with a smile that could light the world. A volunteer's jaw dropped, her eyes went huge, the realization kicking in that this was Ima, the crooked lady with the broken body, and she was walking. The same scene repeated at Christmas. People recognizing her, but unable to reconcile the woman they'd known in the wheelchair with this woman standing before them, whole and healed and praising God with every breath. Dr. David Bell, who had been Ima's primary physician at Mayo Clinic for nearly 10 years, examined her and wrote carefully, "While I currently cannot offer a clear medical explanation for her dramatic improvement, and cannot speculate regarding other possible interpretations, I am nonetheless delighted with Emma's recent progress. Dr. C. Roberts, a Mayo Clinic surgeon with 30 years of experience, had witnessed Emma's twisted and contorted state for years at the Rochester Salvation Army, where he also volunteered. He stated plainly, "What happened to Emma last Christmas is simply not explainable to my knowledge from a medical perspective. I believe the only explanation has to be that God intervened in her life with a miracle." The medical documentation was irrefutable. On December 2011, Emma's body showed all the signs of severe RSD, with a mangled spine, crippled foot, and club hand that had been present for 17 years. On Christmas Eve, everything was different, healed, restored to a condition that medical science said was impossible. CBN News came to interview her, documenting her story with video footage that would be shared around the world, showing the before photographs of her bent body and the after reality of her standing straight. She appeared on the 700 Club, sharing her testimony with millions of viewers, telling them that Jesus is real, that this miracle wasn't just for her, but for everyone who needed to know that God still moves, still heals, still reaches down into human suffering, and transforms it into testimony. Publishers approached her about writing a book, and she agreed, working to capture the story of those 18 years and that Christmas Eve miracle in a memoir that would be titled Rush of Heaven. 1. Woman's miraculous encounter with Jesus. She made speaking engagements at churches and conferences, traveling to places she never could have reached in her wheelchair, sharing the message that had sustained her through the darkest years. Take God's hand and trust Him. He'll be with you every step of the way. The story spread through Christian media, the Salvation Army's publications, prayer magazines, faith-based websites, but remained largely ignored by mainstream news outlets, as though a miracle documented by Mayo Clinic doctors was less newsworthy than celebrity gossip or political scandals. Yet those who heard the story couldn't forget it, couldn't dismiss it, couldn't explain it away with naturalistic reasoning. Emma became known not as the crooked lady with the broken body in the wheelchair, but as the lady with the Christmas miracle. Living proof that the impossible is possible when God chooses to intervene. She continued to experience some effects of RSD. The condition hadn't entirely disappeared, but the severity was diminished. Manageable, no longer the all-consuming fire that had defined her existence. She returned to Autumn Ridge Church, able to attend services in person for the first time in years, worshipping alongside people who remembered her from before the fall and marveled at what God had done. There are moments in history when heaven touches earth, when the veil between the physical and spiritual grows thin as breath, when God reaches into human suffering and rewrites the ending. Emma's story is one of those moments. A reminder that faith is not about blind optimism or denial of reality, but about trusting in a God who is bigger than our circumstances, more powerful than our pain, more faithful than our doubts. For 18 years she sat in that wheelchair, bent forward, hand clenched, foot shriveled, body screaming with pain that surpassed almost anything the medical world could measure. And for 18 years she chose to believe that God was good, that His promises were true, that healing would come whether on earth or in heaven, that her suffering was not meaningless even when it felt unbearable. The miracle didn't negate those 18 years or make them worthless. It transformed them into testimony, into a story that would encourage thousands of people facing their own impossible situations. She learned in the wheelchair what she never could have learned in health, that joy is a choice more powerful than circumstances, that faith grows strongest in the darkest places, that the human spirit partnered with divine grace can endure what seems unendurable. She learned that small acts of kindness matter, that a smile from a wheelchair can change someone's day, that serving others even in the midst of personal agony gives life meaning beyond our individual stories. She learned to see miracles in places others might miss. In the caregiver who stayed faithful for 18 years, in the church that prayed without ceasing, in the grandchildren who loved her despite her broken body, in the doctors who kept trying even when hope seemed lost. Her message to the world is simple and profound. Jesus is real. Miracles still happen, and no matter what you're going through, God has not abandoned you. She tells people that this is not her miracle alone, but everyone's miracle. A sign that the God who created the universe still cares about individual suffering, still hears desperate prayers cried out in the darkness, still reaches down to touch and heal and transform. She challenges people to partner with this miracle-working God, to trust Him even when the situation seems hopeless, to believe that there is nothing too big for Him to handle. She speaks of the Christmas Eve when Jesus appeared to her in a robe of brilliant white, when He touched her spine and hand and foot, when He offered His hand and helped her to her feet, when He walked with her until she could walk alone. The story has become part of Rochester's living memory, passed down in conversations at the Salvation Army, remembered by doctors at Mayo Clinic who saw something they couldn't explain, treasured by family members who witnessed the impossible on Christmas morning 2011. It stands as evidence that the age of miracles has not passed, that the same Jesus who walked the roads of Galilee 2,000 years ago still walks among us, still has compassion on the suffering, still has power to heal and restore and make all things new. Emma's life demonstrates that God's timing is not our timing, that 18 years of waiting is not too long when the purpose is to build character and faith that can withstand any storm. She waited in the wheelchair, praising God through the pain. And when Christmas came in 2011, heaven met earth in a townhouse in Rochester, Minnesota. The miracle invites questions that go beyond Emo's individual story. What does it mean to have faith when healing doesn't come quickly? How do we maintain hope when years pass and circumstances don't change? What does it look like to serve others when our own needs are overwhelming? Emma's 18 years provide answers not through theological arguments, but through lived experience. Faith means trusting God even when you can't see the end. Hope means choosing joy despite pain. Service means giving what you can from wherever you are. Her story challenges both believers and skeptics, offering medical documentation of an event that shouldn't be possible. Testified to by doctors from one of the world's most respected medical institutions, it forces a choice: believe that something beyond natural explanation occurred, or dismiss the testimony of doctors, caregivers, family members, and the woman herself. Perhaps that's why the story matters so deeply, not just because of the miracle itself, but because of what it reveals about the character of God and the nature of faith. God didn't heal Ima on day 1, or year 5, or even year 15. He waited until Christmas Eve 2011, until she had spent 18 years learning to trust Him completely, until her faith had been refined like gold in fire, until her testimony would carry the weight of authentic suffering overcome by authentic grace. The healing came not as a reward for good behavior, but as a gift of divine love, timed perfectly to reveal God's glory in the most unexpected way. And Emma, who could have been bitter about the years of suffering, chooses instead to see them as preparation for the miracle that would inspire thousands. This account is based on real events, documented by CBN News, the Salvation Army, Hope for Women magazine, and medical professionals at Mayo Clinic, including Dr. David Bell and Dr. C. Robert Stanhope, who confirmed Emma McKinley's condition. Before and after Christmas Eve 2011, the story has been further detailed in her memoir, Rush of Heaven. 1. Woman's miraculous encounter with Jesus, and shared through speaking engagements across the nation. Emma's testimony continues to inspire people facing their own trials, reminding us that faith, patience, and trust in God can sustain us through even the longest, darkest valleys, and that miracles still happen for those who believe.